What happens when a routine traffic stop becomes a career-ending nightmare? Not for the driver, but for the cop. Judge Monica Hart was 2 miles under the speed limit, driving to her niece's graduation with a bouquet on the passenger seat, when Trooper Kyle Brennan forced her onto the shoulder like she'd already committed a crime. He had no idea she was recording. He had no idea who she was. And he definitely had no idea that his routine stop was about to expose a corruption network stretching across 3 states. If you want to see how one woman's quiet courage dismantled an entire system, stay until the end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The afternoon sun pressed against Monica Hart's windshield as Interstate 49 stretched ahead, a silver ribbon cutting through pine forests and red clay hills somewhere between Shreveport and the Arkansas line. She kept her speedometer needle 2 miles below the posted limit, both hands at 10 and 2, her purse tucked beneath the passenger seat where it couldn't shift or slide. On the seat beside her sat a small bouquet of white roses wrapped in lavender tissue paper, Lily's favorite color, and a card congratulating her niece on graduating summa cum laude from Southern University. Monica had left early. She always left early. 15 years on the federal bench had taught her that punctuality was a form of respect, and today mattered too much to risk being late. Lily was the first person in their family to earn a bachelor's degree, and Monica had promised to be there when her name was called. The highway hummed beneath her tires. Traffic was light, a semi in the far lane, a white pickup a quarter-mile back, and an elderly couple in a sedan who'd been maintaining exactly 63 miles per hour for the past 10 minutes. Monica glanced at the dashboard clock. She had 90 minutes to cover 60 miles. Plenty of time. That's when the patrol car appeared. It came up fast in her rearview mirror, closing the distance in seconds. A Louisiana State Police cruiser with light bars mounted across the roof and a push bumper that gleamed chrome in the sunlight. Monica's pulse ticked upward, but she kept her speed steady. She wasn't speeding. Her registration was current. Her inspection sticker was valid. There was no reason for concern. The cruiser pulled alongside her in the left lane. Monica kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral. She could see the trooper through her peripheral vision, a white male, mid-30s, mirrored sunglasses, jaw set in what looked like permanent irritation. He paced her for 5 seconds, 10, 15, close enough that she could see the nameplate on his uniform, Brennan. Then he swerved. It wasn't a drift or a lane correction. It was deliberate, a sharp cut to the right that forced Monica onto the shoulder with less than a foot of clearance. Gravel sprayed against her undercarriage. Her tires skidded, and the bouquet tumbled onto the floorboard as she gripped the wheel and fought to keep the car stable. Her heart hammered. The cruiser's lights erupted, red and blue strobing across the trees, and the siren gave 2 short whoops that seemed to echo off the asphalt. Monica brought her sedan to a stop on the narrow shoulder, her breathing tight and controlled. In her rearview mirror, Trooper Brennan climbed out of his vehicle with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. He adjusted his belt, touched the brim of his campaign hat, and approached her driver's side window with one hand resting casually on his service weapon. Monica's hand stayed on the wheel, visible, non-threatening, compliant. She also reached for the small black rectangle mounted to her sun visor and tapped it twice. The LED indicator blinked red. Recording. Brennan rapped his knuckles against the glass. Monica lowered the window halfway. Good afternoon, officer. License and registration. His voice was flat, bored, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized years ago. May I ask why you pulled me over? Brennan's jaw tightened. License and registration, now. Monica kept her tone steady. I'd like to know the reason for the stop. You were swerving. I wasn't swerving. You forced me onto the shoulder. Brennan leaned down, bringing his face level with the window. His breath smelled faintly of coffee and something sharper, tobacco maybe, or stress. Are you refusing to provide your documents? I'm asking for the legal basis of this stop. His hand moved to the door handle. Step out of the vehicle. Officer, Step out of the vehicle. Now. Monica unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, her movements deliberate. She opened the door and stood, keeping her hands visible at her sides. She was 5'6" in flats, slender, dressed in a navy blazer and gray slacks that she'd planned to wear to the ceremony. Brennan towered over her, his posture radiating authority and barely restrained aggression. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle." "I haven't done anything wrong." "Hands on the vehicle or you're going in cuffs." Monica placed her palms flat against the warm metal of her car. Brennan moved in close, too close, and began patting her down with rough, impersonal efficiency. His hands moved across her shoulders, down her sides, along her waist. When he reached her pockets, he paused. "What's this?" "My phone." He pulled it out and held it up to the light, squinting at the screen. "You recording me?" "It's my right to record a public servant performing their duties." Brennan's expression darkened. He pocketed the phone without another word and moved to her open car door. "I'm going to search your vehicle." "You don't have my consent." "I don't need your consent. I smell marijuana." Monica's stomach dropped. "There's no marijuana in my car." "That's what they all say." Brennan leaned into the vehicle, one boot still on the pavement, and began rifling through the center console. He pulled out a pack of gum, a tire pressure gauge, a stack of napkins from a fast food restaurant. He tossed them onto the passenger seat carelessly, then moved to the glove compartment. Monica stood frozen, her mind racing. She'd been stopped before, twice in her 20s, once in her 30s, and each time had ended with a warning and a lecture about broken taillights or expired tags. But this felt different. This felt targeted. Brennan straightened up, holding her registration and insurance card. He scanned them briefly, then walked back to his cruiser without a word. Monica watched in her side mirror as he climbed into the driver's seat and picked up his radio. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see his lips moving, his hand gesturing sharply. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. A second patrol car pulled up behind Brennan's cruiser, lights flashing. A younger trooper stepped out, late 20s, sandy hair, eyes that darted nervously between Brennan and Monica, like he'd walked into a situation he didn't fully understand. His nameplate read Pike. Brennan climbed out and met Pike halfway, their voices low and urgent. Monica strained to hear, but the traffic noise and the distance made it impossible. She saw Brennan gesture toward her car, then toward her, his expression animated. Pike nodded slowly, his face pale. Then Brennan turned and walked back to Monica's vehicle with something in his hand, a bottle, small, clear glass, amber liquid inside. Monica's breath stopped. "Look what I found under your seat," Brennan said, holding it up like a trophy. "That's not mine." "Sure it's not." He unscrewed the cap and sniffed. "Open container, that's a violation." "I don't drink. That bottle was not in my car." Brennan smiled, thin, humorless, the smile of someone who knew the script by heart. "You got any other contraband I should know about? Pills, weapons, cash?" "I want to speak to your supervisor." "You'll speak to whoever I tell you to speak to." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something quieter, more dangerous. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign this citation, accept responsibility, and we're all going to move on with our day. Or you can make this difficult, and I'll have you in cuffs before you can say civil rights. Your choice." Monica looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd seen 100 times before in courtrooms and interrogation rooms and depositions. The arrogance of someone who believed the system would protect them. The casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences. She spoke quietly, each word deliberate. "I'm a federal judge for the Western District of Louisiana. Everything you've done in the last 15 minutes has been recorded, not just on my phone, which you illegally confiscated, but on a separate device currently transmitting to a secure server. You forced me off the road without cause. You searched my vehicle without consent or probable cause. And you just planted evidence in front of a witness." The color drained from Brennan's face. Pike, standing 10 feet away, went rigid. Monica continued, her voice still calm but edged with steel. "You have 2 options. You can return my phone, apologize, and let me leave. And I'll consider this a training opportunity. Or you can continue, and I'll make sure your career ends before sunset." Brennan's hand twitched toward his weapon. "You're lying. Call your supervisor, right now. Tell him you've detained Judge Monica Hart on Interstate 49 at mile marker 72. Tell him you searched her vehicle without consent. Tell him about the bottle. See how that conversation goes." Pike took a step forward. "Kyle, shut up." Brennan's voice was raw, panicked. He pulled out his radio, hesitated, then keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need a supervisor at mile marker 72, southbound." The radio crackled. "Copy Unit 12. Nature of the request?" Brennan glanced at Monica, his jaw working. "Just send a supervisor." They stood in silence. Monica kept her posture loose, her hands visible. Pike shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes fixed on the ground. Brennan's radio squawked periodically, other units checking in, routine traffic, the mundane rhythm of a shift that had suddenly gone catastrophically wrong. 15 minutes later, an unmarked sedan pulled up, a dark blue Crown Victoria with government plates. The driver stepped out slowly, a man in his late 40s wearing plain clothes, khakis, a polo shirt, a windbreaker with LSP embroidered on the chest. He had the kind of face that seemed designed to be forgotten, neutral features, thinning hair, eyes that gave nothing away. "Trooper Brennan," the man said, his voice measured and calm. "What's the situation?" "Sir, Brennan hesitated, his confidence crumbling. "I pulled over a vehicle for erratic driving. The driver became uncooperative and—" "I'm Judge Monica Hart," Monica interrupted. "I was forced off the road without cause, searched without consent, and this officer attempted to plant an open container in my vehicle. I've recorded the entire encounter." The man in the windbreaker studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Brennan. "Is this true?" "Sir, she's lying. Is this true?" Brennan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man watching his life collapse in real time. The man in the windbreaker nodded slowly. "Trooper Pike, return to your vehicle. Trooper Brennan, you're suspended pending investigation. Hand over your badge and your weapon." "Sir, you can't—" "I just did." Brennan's hand shook as he unclipped his badge and holster. He placed them in the man's outstretched hand, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. "This is bullshit. She's—" "Leave now!" Brennan climbed into his cruiser and slammed the door hard enough to make the frame shudder. The engine roared to life, and he peeled onto the highway, tires squealing. Pike followed seconds later, his movement slower, more hesitant, like he was still processing what had just happened. Monica stood alone on the shoulder with the man in the windbreaker. He pocketed Brennan's badge and holster, then extended a hand. "Cal Grant, Internal Affairs." Monica didn't take it. "You got here awfully fast for someone from Internal Affairs." Grant lowered his hand, his expression still neutral. "We monitor patrol activity closely. Radio chatter flagged a potential issue, and I was already in the area." "Convenient." "Judge Hart, I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset. I'm documenting a pattern." Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. "A pattern?" "This isn't the first time Trooper Brennan has pulled this routine, is it?" Monica's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Forcing drivers onto the shoulder, searching without consent, planting evidence. How many complaints has he racked up? How many were dismissed as unsubstantiated?" Grant's face remained impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe, or concern. "I can't comment on ongoing personnel matters." "You don't have to. I'll find out myself." Monica took a step closer. "Now give me my phone and I'll be on my way." Grant reached into his pocket and pulled out Monica's phone. He held it for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Judge Hart, let me be clear. What happened here today was unfortunate, but it's an isolated incident. Trooper Brennan made a mistake and he'll face appropriate consequences. There's no need to escalate this further." Monica took the phone from his hand. "That's not your decision to make." "I'm trying to help you." "No, you're trying to protect him." Monica's voice hardened. "You're trying to protect a system that allows officers like Brennan to terrorize people because they know no one will hold them accountable. But I'm not no one, and I'm not going anywhere." Grant's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for Monica to see the mask crack. "Be careful, Judge. You're making accusations without evidence." "I have evidence, and I have a voice." Monica held up her phone. "This recording is already backed up to 3 separate servers. If something happens to me, if I get pulled over again, if my house gets broken into, if I suddenly have car trouble, it goes public. Along with everything else I'm about to uncover." Grant stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, his face settling back into neutrality. "Drive safely, Judge Hart." He turned and walked back to his sedan, climbed in, and drove away without looking back. Monica stood alone on the shoulder, her heart still pounding, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. She picked up the bouquet from the floorboard, straightened the crushed petals, and placed it back on the passenger seat. Then she pulled onto the highway and continued south. She didn't make it to the graduation ceremony. She made 3 phone calls instead. The first was to her clerk, instructing him to pull every traffic stop case filed in the Western District over the past 5 years involving Louisiana State Police. The second was to a colleague in the Fifth Circuit who specialized in civil rights litigation. The third was to a reporter named Elena Park at the New Orleans Tribune, a woman who'd spent the last decade exposing corruption in law enforcement and never backed down from a fight. Elena answered on the second ring. "Judge Hart, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need to tell you about a traffic stop," Monica said quietly, "and then I need to show you what happens when you start pulling the thread." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a shift in energy, like a predator catching the scent of prey. "I'm listening." Monica took a breath and began to speak, her voice steady, her words precise. She described Brennan's approach, the illegal search, the planted bottle, Grant's convenient arrival and thinly veiled threats. She described the way Pike had stood frozen, complicit through silence. She described the look on Brennan's face when he realized he'd been caught. When she finished, Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Send me the recording." "It's already in your inbox." "Good." Elena's voice turned sharp, focused. "Now, let me tell you what I know about Trooper Kyle Brennan." What Elena knew painted a picture that made Monica's stomach turn. Brennan had been with the Louisiana State Police for 12 years. In that time, he'd accumulated 17 formal complaints, excessive force, illegal searches, harassment, intimidation. Every single one had been dismissed as unsubstantiated or unfounded. His personnel file was a masterclass in institutional protection, glowing performance reviews, commendations for drug interdiction, citations for outstanding service to the community. But Elena had been digging. She'd found drivers who'd been pulled over on the same stretch of highway and subjected to the same treatment: searches without consent, planted evidence, threats, and humiliation. Most had been too afraid or too poor to fight back. One had filed a lawsuit and dropped it 6 weeks later after his house was broken into and his dog was poisoned. Another had gone public and lost her job when anonymous tips about drug use reached her employer. "It's not just Brennan," Elena said. "It's a network. Troopers coordinate stops, share targets, and cover for each other. They've been doing it for years." Monica's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "How high does it go?" "That's what we're going to find out." They worked through the night. Elena pulled files, cross-referenced names, tracked dashcam footage that had mysteriously disappeared from evidence lockers. Monica combed through court records, looking for patterns, dismissed cases, dropped charges, settlements paid quietly out of public view. Her clerk emailed her a spreadsheet at 2 a.m, 63 cases in 3 years involving traffic stops on Interstate 49, all dismissed before trial, all involving the same handful of troopers. Brennan's name appeared in 42 of them. At dawn, Monica sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and a printout of Elena's findings spread across the surface. The picture was clear now, sharp-edged and brutal. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about a system designed to hunt people for profit, seizures disguised as interdiction, stops designed to intimidate, and a chain of command that looked the other way as long as the numbers stayed strong. Her phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Press conference tomorrow. You in?" Monica stared at the message for a long moment. She thought about Lily, who'd walked across that stage without her aunt in the audience. She thought about the drivers who'd been pulled over and traumatized, their voices silenced by fear and power. She thought about the man in the windbreaker who'd tried to make her complicit in her own silence. She typed back, "I'm in." The press conference took place on the steps of the federal courthouse in Shreveport. Monica stood behind a cluster of microphones, Elena Park at her side, and told her story in clear, precise language that left no room for doubt. She played the audio recording, Brennan's voice, Pike's silence, Grant's thinly veiled threats. She showed the spreadsheet, the complaint files, the patterns that emerged when someone finally bothered to look. The questions came fast and sharp. Monica answered each one with the calm authority of someone who'd spent years in a courtroom dismantling lies. Are you calling for Trooper Brennan's termination? I'm calling for a federal investigation into a pattern of civil rights violations and criminal conduct. Do you believe this goes beyond one officer? The evidence suggests a coordinated network of illegal activity spanning multiple jurisdictions and involving supervisory personnel. What do you want to see happen? Monica looked directly into the camera. I want accountability. I want transparency. And I want every driver who was victimized by this system to know that their voices matter. The story went viral within hours. National outlets picked it up. Legal advocacy groups issued statements of support. The Department of Justice announced a preliminary inquiry. And on a quiet stretch of Interstate 49, Trooper Kyle Brennan sat in his truck with his phone turned off and his badge on the dashboard, watching his world fall apart in real time. But Monica wasn't finished, because 3 days after the press conference, her niece Lily called, voice shaking, words tumbling over each other in panic, and said she'd just been pulled over on the same highway by a trooper who claimed she matched the description of a suspect. Lily, who drove a 10-year-old sedan and had never gotten so much as a parking ticket. Lily, who was 22 years old and terrified. Monica's blood went cold. Where are you? Mile marker 68. He's still here. Aunt Monica, I'm scared. Stay on the line. Don't hang up. I'm calling someone right now. Monica didn't call a supervisor. She called the FBI. The FBI field agent who answered Monica's call was a woman named Sarah Chen, and her voice carried the kind of practiced calm that came from years of talking people through crises. Monica gave her the coordinates, Lily's license plate number, and a terse summary of what had happened 3 days earlier. Chen didn't ask questions. She didn't express doubt. She simply said, "Stay on the line with your niece. I'm dispatching units now." Monica switched back to Lily, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Lily, honey, help is coming. Just stay calm. Keep your hands where he can see them. Don't argue. Don't resist. Answer his questions politely. Can you do that?" Lily's voice was thin, stretched tight with fear. "He's coming back to the car. Put me on speaker. Let me hear everything." There was a rustle, then the sound of a window rolling down. A male voice, older, gruff, with the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "Officer, can you tell me why I was pulled over?" Lily's voice shook, but she kept it steady. "I asked you to step out of the vehicle." "I'd like to know the reason for the stop first." A pause. Then, quieter but edged with irritation. "Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order?" Monica's knuckles went white around her phone. She wanted to scream, to reach through the line and pull Lily to safety. Instead, she forced her voice into something calm and measured. "Lily, tell him you're complying, but you're also recording this interaction, and your attorney is on the line." Lily repeated the words, her voice gaining strength. "I'm complying, officer, but I want you to know I'm recording this interaction, and my attorney is on the line right now." Another pause, longer this time, waited with calculation. Then the officer's tone shifted, became more careful, almost rehearsed. "Ma'am, I pulled you over because your vehicle matches the description of one involved in a hit and run earlier today. I need to verify your identity and confirm that this vehicle wasn't at the scene." Monica closed her eyes. It was a textbook excuse, vague enough to sound legitimate, specific enough to justify a stop, impossible to disprove in the moment. She'd seen it 100 times in suppression hearings. "What was the location of the hit and run?" Monica asked, loud enough for the officer to hear. A beat of silence. "Who's on the line?" "This is Judge Monica Hart, Federal District Court, Western District of Louisiana. I'm Miss Ward's attorney. I'll ask again, what was the location of the alleged hit and run, and what specific features of my client's vehicle match the description?" The silence stretched longer this time. Monica could hear the officer's breathing, the faint crackle of a radio in the background, the whisper of wind across the phone's microphone. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to speak with you directly. You're speaking with me now. Answer the question. This is official police business, and this is a civil rights violation in progress. Location and description, now." More silence. Then, finally, the incident occurred on Highway 171 near Mansfield. The vehicle was described as a dark sedan, late model, with damage to the rear bumper. Lily's voice cut in, stronger now. My car is 12 years old, and there's no damage to my bumper. You can see that from where you're standing. The officer didn't respond immediately. Monica could picture him, standing beside Lily's car, one hand on his belt, eyes scanning the highway for backup or witnesses, his mind calculating the risk-reward ratio of pushing forward versus letting this go. I'm going to need to run your information, he said finally. She's already provided her license and registration, Monica said. Unless you have probable cause to detain her further, she's free to go. Judge Hart. Unless you have probable cause, she's free to go. Another long silence. Then the sound of footsteps moving away, gravel crunching under boots. The officer's voice came back faint and muffled, speaking into his radio. Monica couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Frustration, maybe confusion, and something that sounded like a request for guidance. 5 minutes passed. Lily's breathing was audible through the phone, quick, shallow, the sound of someone trying hard not to panic. Monica stayed on the line, murmuring reassurances, keeping her niece grounded. Then she heard sirens. 2 vehicles pulled up. One marked FBI, one unmarked. Sarah Chen climbed out of the unmarked car, her badge clipped to her belt, her posture radiating authority without aggression. She walked directly to the trooper, spoke to him in tones too low for the phone to catch, and after a moment he nodded and returned to Lily's window. Ma'am, you're free to go. Drive safely. He turned and walked back to his patrol car without another word. Lily sat frozen for a moment, then exhaled in a rush. Aunt Monica? I'm here, baby. You're okay. Agent Chen is going to follow you home. Lily's voice broke. What if she hadn't come? What if you hadn't called? Monica didn't have an answer, not one that would make the fear go away. An hour later, Monica sat in her chambers with Sarah Chen across the desk, a slim folder open between them. Chen's expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp, the eyes of someone who'd spent years reading between the lines of official reports and finding the truth buried underneath. Your niece is safe, Chen said. The officer who stopped her is named Dennis Walsh, 14 years with LSP, assigned to the same district as Brennan. No complaints on file, clean disciplinary record, but... She paused, tapping the folder. He's been involved in 73 traffic stops in the past 18 months. 60 of them resulted in searches. 41 resulted in cash seizures. Only 3 resulted in arrests. Monica felt her stomach tighten. He's hunting. They're all hunting. Chen leaned forward. Judge Hart, what you uncovered with Brennan is just the surface. We've been building a case for 8 months, monitoring radio traffic, tracking seizure reports, interviewing victims who were too scared to come forward. This is organized, coordinated, and it goes a lot higher than a few patrol officers. How high? Chen hesitated, then flipped open the folder and turned it so Monica could see. Inside were photographs, surveillance images, dashcam stills, documents with names and dates highlighted in yellow. Monica recognized some of the faces, troopers she'd seen testifying in court, their words smooth and confident, supervisors who'd vouched for officers facing misconduct allegations, and one face that made her blood run cold. Cal Grant, the man in the windbreaker, Internal Affairs. Grant isn't investigating corruption, Chen said quietly. He's managing it. When complaints get filed, he's the one who makes them disappear. When officers cross the line, he's the one who provides cover. And when someone pushes back too hard... She tapped another photograph. A burned-out car on the side of a highway, emergency lights flashing in the darkness. Marcus Wade, 34 years old, stopped by Brennan on I-49 2 years ago. Refused a search, filed a complaint, hired a lawyer. 3 weeks later, his car went off the road at 2 in the morning. Accident report said he was drunk. Toxicology showed a blood alcohol level of 0.0. Monica stared at the photograph, her mind racing. You think they killed him? I think someone made sure he couldn't testify. Chen closed the folder. Judge Hart, you've put yourself in the middle of something very dangerous. These officers don't just stop people, they hunt them. They target drivers they think are vulnerable, people who won't fight back, People who don't have the resources or the platform to make noise. And when someone does fight back, they escalate. Are you telling me to back down? I'm telling you that if you keep pushing, they'll push back harder. And next time, it might not be a traffic stop. Chen's voice softened slightly. We can protect you. We can protect your family. But you need to let us handle this. Monica sat back in her chair, her mind churning through the implications. She thought about Lily's voice on the phone, shaking with fear. She thought about Marcus Wade's car burning on the side of the highway. She thought about all the drivers who'd been stopped and searched and humiliated, their voices silenced by fear and power. What do you need from me? She asked. Chen smiled, small, grim, but genuine. Everything you've got. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening. Monica provided case files, recordings, the spreadsheet her clerk had compiled. Chen brought field reports, intercepted communications, financial records showing cash seizures that didn't match official logs. Together, they began assembling a picture that was far worse than Monica had imagined. The operation had a name, unofficial, used only in radio chatter and internal memos: Highway Interdiction Initiative. On paper, it was a drug enforcement program designed to identify and stop traffickers using Interstate 49 as a corridor between Texas and the Gulf Coast. In practice, it was a legalized shakedown. Officers targeted out-of-state plates, rental cars, older vehicles with visible wear, anything that suggested a driver who might be carrying cash and wouldn't have the means to fight back. They used pretextual stops, minor traffic violations, equipment issues, vague claims of suspicious behavior to justify searches. And when they found cash, they seized it under civil asset forfeiture laws that allowed them to take money without ever filing criminal charges. The money went into a fund controlled by the district command. Some of it was used for equipment and training. Some of it disappeared into overtime payments and bonuses. And some of it, a significant percentage, went to a private contractor that provided consultation services for the interdiction program. The contractor's name was Sentinel Risk Management. Its owner was Cal Grant's brother-in-law. Monica read the financial documents twice, her disbelief giving way to cold fury. This is a racketeering operation. Technically, it's civil asset forfeiture, Chen said dryly. But yes, it's theft with a badge. How much have they taken? Chen pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop and turned the screen toward Monica. The numbers made her head spin. Over the past 5 years, Louisiana State Police had seized more than $23 million in cash from drivers on Interstate 49. Less than 8% had been returned. Less than 4% had resulted in criminal convictions. They're not fighting crime, Monica said quietly. They're funding themselves. And they're very, very good at it. Chen closed the laptop. Which is why taking them down is going to be complicated. We need airtight evidence, multiple witnesses, and a case that can survive the inevitable political pressure. These officers have friends. In the State House, in the District Attorney's office, in the media. The moment we move, they'll fight back with everything they have. Then we make sure they can't fight back. Monica's voice was hard, decisive. She'd spent 15 years on the bench weighing evidence and parsing law. She knew how to build a case that couldn't be dismantled. We document everything, we protect the witnesses, and we don't give them any room to maneuver. Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's get to work. The first witness was a woman named Denise Carter, 36 years old, single mother of 2, stopped on I-49 18 months earlier while driving home from her sister's funeral in Dallas. Trooper Brennan had pulled her over for following too closely, searched her car despite her refusal, and seized $4,200 she'd withdrawn from her savings account to pay for funeral expenses. He'd given her a receipt and told her she could contest the seizure in court. She'd tried. The case had been dismissed on procedural grounds after the state failed to provide evidence. Her money was never returned. Denise sat in Monica's chambers with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, like maybe I didn't fill out the forms right, or maybe I missed a deadline. I didn't know it was all fake. Monica kept her voice gentle. It wasn't your fault. The system is designed to be confusing. I needed that money. My kids, we were behind on rent, and I couldn't. Denise's voice broke. She pressed her palms against her eyes, shoulders shaking. Monica waited, letting her cry. Chen sat quietly in the corner, taking notes, her expression carefully neutral. After a moment, Denise lowered her hands and took a shaky breath. "What do you need me to do?" "Testify," Monica said. "Tell your story. Let people see what happened to you. They'll come after me. We'll protect you." Denise looked at Monica with red-rimmed eyes, her face etched with exhaustion and fear and something that looked like hope struggling to stay alive. "You promise?" Monica held her gaze. "I promise." Over the next 2 weeks, they found 11 more witnesses, drivers who'd been stopped, searched, and robbed under the guise of law enforcement, a college student traveling to a job interview, an elderly couple driving to their grandson's wedding, a veteran returning from a medical appointment at the VA. Each story followed the same pattern: a pretextual stop, a coerced search, cash seized, and a bureaucratic maze designed to make recovery impossible. Chen documented each case with meticulous care: photographs, receipts, dashcam footage, when it existed, written statements signed and notarized. Monica cross-referenced the stops with court records, looking for patterns and connections. Elena Park interviewed the witnesses on camera, building a documentary record that could withstand scrutiny. They worked in secret, meeting in hotel conference rooms and borrowed offices, always watching for signs of surveillance. Chen's team swept Monica's chambers for listening devices twice a week. Monica varied her routes home, checked her car for tracking devices, and kept her phone's location services disabled. The pressure was constant. Monica's voicemail filled with messages from reporters, advocacy groups, and anonymous callers who left threats in flat, emotionless voices. Someone spray-painted her driveway with the words "snitch" and "traitor." Her sister called from Houston, voice tight with worry, asking if Monica was safe and whether Lily should transfer to a different school. Monica told her the truth. She didn't know. But she kept working. 3 weeks after Lily's stop, Elena Park published the first major investigative piece, a 6,000-word article in the New Orleans Tribune titled "Highway Robbery: How Louisiana Police Turned Interstate 49 into a Cash Machine." It included interviews with victims, analysis of seizure data, photographs of officers coordinating stops, and copies of internal memos showing supervisors encouraging aggressive interdiction tactics. The response was immediate and explosive. The governor called for an independent review. The state attorney general announced a task force. Civil rights organizations filed federal lawsuits, and social media erupted with stories from drivers who'd been stopped on the same stretch of highway and subjected to the same treatment. But the pushback was equally fierce. The Louisiana State Police Benevolent Association held a press conference defending the interdiction program as a critical tool for fighting drug trafficking. District attorneys issued statements supporting the officers, and a coalition of sheriffs and police chiefs released an open letter accusing Monica of undermining law enforcement and endangering public safety. Cal Grant appeared on the evening news, his expression somber and sincere. "Judge Hart is a respected member of the judiciary, and we take her concerns seriously. But these allegations are based on incomplete information and fail to account for the realities of modern policing. Our officers risk their lives every day to keep our highways safe. They deserve our support, not unwarranted attacks." Monica watched the interview from her living room, her hands clenched into fists. Chen sat beside her, her face unreadable. "He's good," Chen said quietly. "He's a liar. He's a liar with a badge and a union contract." Chen glanced at Monica. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." She was right. 2 days later, Trooper Evan Pike, the young officer who'd stood silent during Monica's stop, was found dead in his apartment. The initial report called it a suicide. A single gunshot wound to the head, service weapon on the floor beside him, no signs of forced entry. His girlfriend told reporters he'd been depressed lately, struggling with the job, talking about quitting. But Monica knew better. Pike had been scared. Scared of Brennan, scared of the system, scared of what would happen if he spoke up. And someone had decided he was a liability. Chen confirmed it 3 days later, sitting in Monica's chambers with a grim expression. "The angle of the wound is wrong. The gunpowder residue doesn't match a self-inflicted shot. And his girlfriend changed her story after a visit from Cal Grant." Monica felt something cold settle in her chest. "They killed him. We can't prove it. Not yet. Chen leaned forward. But Pike left something behind, a flash drive hidden in his locker at the station. His partner found it and brought it to us. She pulled a small plastic evidence bag from her briefcase and placed it on Monica's desk. Inside was a standard USB drive, the kind sold in packs at any office supply store. "What's on it?" Monica asked. "Radio logs, dashcam footage that was supposed to be deleted, text messages between officers coordinating stops, financial records showing cash seizures that never made it into official reports." Chen's voice was quiet, steady. "Everything we need to take this network down." Monica stared at the drive, her mind racing. Pike had been terrified, complicit, trapped between conscience and survival. And in the end, he'd chosen to do the right thing, even if it cost him everything. "We use it," Monica said. "We use every word, every image, every piece of evidence, and we make sure they can't bury him the way they buried Marcus Wade." Chen nodded slowly. "Then we need to move fast, because once they realize what Pike left behind, they're going to come after everyone involved." "Let them come." That night, Monica didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, reviewing the files from Pike's flash drive. The radio logs showed officers using coded language to identify targets. White pickup with Texas plates, rental sedan heading north, single female driver with out-of-state ID. The dashcam footage showed stops that never appeared in official reports, searches conducted without consent, money seized and pocketed, drivers threatened into silence. The text messages were even more damning, casual conversations between officers discussing their scores and joking about the people they'd terrorized. One exchange made Monica's blood run cold. "Brennan. Got another one. 8K cash, claims it's for a car purchase. Yeah, right. Walsh. Nice. Split the usual way? Brennan. Of course. Grant gets his cut. Rest goes in the fund. Walsh. What if she files a complaint? Brennan. She won't. And if she does, Grant handles it. That's what we pay him for." Monica read the messages 3 times, committing every word to memory. Then she forwarded the files to Chen, Elena Park, and a secure server maintained by a civil rights law firm in Atlanta. If something happened to her, if the evidence disappeared, there were backups, multiple copies scattered across jurisdictions and networks, impossible to suppress. At 3 a.m, her phone rang. Unknown number. Monica answered anyway. "Judge Hart?" The voice was male, calm, almost polite. "You should stop what you're doing." Monica's hand tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "Someone who's trying to help you. You're in over your head. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly. You're protecting criminals." A soft laugh, devoid of humor. "We're protecting a system that works. You're trying to tear it down because of one bad stop. Let it go." "A man is dead. Evan Pike killed himself because he couldn't handle the pressure. That's not our fault. You murdered him." Silence on the other end, long, weighted, deliberate. Then, "Be careful, Judge. Accidents happen, especially on highways." The line went dead. Monica sat in the darkness, her heart pounding, Pike's words echoing in her mind. She thought about Marcus Wade's burned car. She thought about Denise Carter's savings, stolen and never returned. She thought about Lily, pulled over on the same stretch of road, terrified and alone. She called Chen. "They just threatened me," Monica said when Chen answered. "I know, we were monitoring the call." Chen's voice was tight. "Pack a bag. We're moving you to a safe house." "I'm not hiding." "Judge Hart." "I'm not hiding," Monica repeated, her voice hard. "If they want to come after me, let them try. But I'm not backing down." Chen was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. "All right, but we're putting a protection detail on you, and you don't go anywhere alone. Fine. And Judge Hart, watch your back. These people don't play games." Monica hung up and sat in the silence of her kitchen, the weight of what she'd started settling over her like a heavy coat. She'd pulled the thread, and the entire fabric was unraveling. Officers, supervisors, internal affairs, contractors, a network of corruption that had operated unchecked for years, protected by badges and bureaucracy and the assumption that no one would care enough to fight back. But Monica cared, and she wasn't alone. The next morning, she walked into her chambers to find Sarah Chen waiting with two other agents, a man and a woman, both in plain clothes, both carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of federal work. Chen made introductions quickly. This is Agent Marcus Torres and Agent Kim Patel. They'll be coordinating witness protection and evidence security. Torres nodded, his expression serious. Judge Hart, we need to move quickly. Once the grand jury convenes, there's going to be a lot of pressure to shut this down. We need every piece of evidence locked down and every witness secured before that happens. How long do we have? Monica asked. 3 weeks, Patel said. Maybe 4 if we're lucky. Monica glanced at Chen. That's not enough time. It's the time we have. Chen spread a map across Monica's desk, Interstate 49 marked with colored pins, each one representing a stop, a seizure, a victim. We prioritize. The strongest cases, the clearest evidence, the witnesses who can't be discredited. We build an indictment that's airtight, and we move before they have a chance to destroy what's left. Monica studied the map, her mind calculating routes and connections, seeing the pattern emerge like a constellation in the dark. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, systematic, a machine designed to extract money from vulnerable people and funnel it into pockets that were already full. All right, she said quietly. Let's bring them down. The grand jury convened on a Tuesday morning in a windowless room on the 3rd floor of the federal courthouse. 23 citizens drawn from parishes across northwest Louisiana sat in tiered seats, their faces reflecting everything from curiosity to skepticism to outright boredom. Monica watched them file in from the prosecution table, her hands folded calmly in front of her, though her pulse hammered in her throat. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Reese stood to present the case, a lean man in his early 50s with silver hair and the kind of measured cadence that came from decades of courtroom work. He opened with a simple statement that cut through the procedural formality like a blade. What you're about to hear is not about a few bad officers making mistakes. It's about a criminal enterprise operating under the cover of law enforcement, targeting innocent people, stealing their money, and destroying their lives. And it's about what happens when that enterprise decides someone has become a threat. He showed them Evan Pike's autopsy photos first. The images were clinical, brutal. The entrance wound, the angle inconsistent with suicide, the absence of powder tattooing on Pike's hand. A forensic pathologist explained in precise, emotionless language why the physical evidence contradicted the official narrative. Pike hadn't killed himself. Someone had staged it to look that way. 2 jurors shifted uncomfortably. One woman in the back row pressed her hand to her mouth. Then Reese played the audio from Monica's traffic stop. Brennan's voice filled the room, aggressive, dismissive, contemptuous. The sound of Monica's calm questions, Brennan's escalating threats, the moment he claimed to find the bottle that hadn't been there minutes before. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. That's a federal judge, Reese said quietly. Imagine what happens when the victim is someone without power, without resources, without a voice. He brought up Denise Carter next. She walked to the witness stand with her shoulders squared and her chin up, but Monica could see the tremor in her hands. Reese guided her through the story with gentle precision. The funeral, the cash withdrawal, the stop, the search, the seizure. Denise's voice broke twice, but she pushed through, describing how she'd begged Brennan to let her keep enough money to buy groceries for her kids. He laughed, Denise said, staring straight ahead. He told me I should have thought about that before I broke the law. But I didn't break any law. I was just trying to bury my sister. One of the jurors, an older black man in a button-down shirt, wiped his eyes. Another woman scribbled notes furiously, her jaw tight. Over the next 3 days, Reese brought witness after witness. The college student who'd lost the deposit for her first apartment. The veteran whose disability check had been seized on his way to pay for his daughter's surgery. The elderly couple whose 50th anniversary trip had been derailed when Trooper Walsh took $7,000 and told them to hire a lawyer if they had a problem with it. Each story built on the last, creating a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. Pretextual stops, coerced searches, cash seized without criminal charges, and a bureaucratic process designed to make recovery impossible, confusing paperwork, missed deadlines, hearings scheduled during work hours with no notice, Cases dismissed on technicalities before victims could even present evidence. Chen testified on the fourth day, walking the jury through the financial records Pike had saved. She projected spreadsheets on a screen at the front of the room, highlighting discrepancies between seizure reports and bank deposits, showing how money disappeared into accounts controlled by Sentinel Risk Management, demonstrating the flow of cash from highway stops to private pockets. "This isn't law enforcement," Chen said, her voice cutting through the room's thick silence. "This is organized theft, and the people running it knew exactly what they were doing." She played excerpts from the radio logs. Officers using coded language to identify targets, supervisors encouraging aggressive tactics, dispatchers routing troopers to locations where productive stops were most likely. Then she showed the text messages between Brennan and Walsh, their casual discussions of splits and cuts, and Grant's role in making problems disappear. The jurors leaned forward, reading the words on the screen. One man shook his head slowly, his expression somewhere between disbelief and disgust. On the fifth day, Reese called Cal Grant. Grant walked into the room like a man attending a business meeting. Tailored suit, polished shoes, expression neutral and vaguely sympathetic. He took the oath without hesitation and settled into the witness chair with the ease of someone who'd testified dozens of times before. Reese started gently. "Mr. Grant, you work in internal affairs for Louisiana State Police, correct?" "That's correct." "And your role is to investigate complaints against officers?" "Yes. We take all complaints seriously and conduct thorough, impartial investigations." "How many complaints have been filed against Trooper Kyle Brennan in the past 5 years?" Grant didn't blink. "I'd have to check the exact number, but I believe it's somewhere around 15 to 20. 17, Reese said. "And how many of those resulted in disciplinary action?" "None. The complaints were all determined to be unfounded." "All 17? "Yes." Reese let the answer hang in the air for a moment. Then he pulled up a document on the screen, a complaint filed by Marcus Wade 2 years earlier, detailing an illegal search, threats, and a seizure of $4,800. The report was 3 pages long, single-spaced, accompanied by photographs of Wade's car and receipts showing the source of the cash. "This is one of those unfounded complaints," Reese said. "Can you explain why Mr. Wade's account wasn't credible?" Grant glanced at the document, his expression unchanged. Officer Brennan's report indicated that Mr. Wade consented to the search and that the cash was seized pursuant to probable cause related to drug activity. Mr. Wade claimed he never consented. He had witnesses who said the same thing. Why weren't they interviewed? "We interviewed all relevant parties. There's no record of any witness interviews in the file." Grant's jaw tightened slightly. "Not all investigative steps are documented in the final report." Reese nodded slowly, then pulled up another document, the accident report for Marcus Wade's death. 3 weeks after he filed that complaint, Mr. Wade died when his car went off the road. The report says he was intoxicated, but the toxicology report shows 0 blood alcohol. Can you explain that discrepancy? "I'm not familiar with the accident investigation. That would have been handled by a different agency." "But you closed his complaint the day after he died." Grant hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but long enough for the jurors to notice. "The complaint was closed because there was no basis to proceed. Or because the complainant couldn't testify anymore." "I resent that implication." Reese leaned against the prosecution table, his voice still calm, still measured. "Mr. Grant, do you have any financial relationship with Sentinel Risk Management?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Grant's expression went carefully blank. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Sentinel Risk Management provides consulting services to Louisiana State Police. Your brother-in-law owns the company. You receive monthly payments from that company. Are those facts accurate?" Grant shifted in his seat. "I do occasional consulting work for Sentinel. That's not a secret." "What kind of consulting?" "Risk assessment, training development, administrative support." "And how much have you been paid by Sentinel over the past 3 years?" Grant's pause was longer this time. "I don't have those figures in front of me." Reese nodded to Chen, who handed him a single sheet of paper. $214,000. Does that sound accurate? The juror's head snapped toward Grant. One woman's mouth fell open. Grant's composure cracked slightly. My consulting work is legitimate. It has nothing to do with interdiction operations. In interdiction operations that generated more than $20 million in seizures, a significant portion of which was paid to Sentinel for services that are never clearly defined in any contract or invoice. Reese's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath now. Mr. Grant, you weren't investigating complaints. You were protecting the officers who generated the most revenue, and you were getting paid to do it. That's not true. Then explain why every single complaint against Trooper Brennan was dismissed. Explain why Marcus Wade's file was closed the day after he died. Explain why Evan Pike's suicide note was typed instead of handwritten, and why his service weapon was found in his right hand even though he was left-handed. Grant's face flushed. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Reese pulled up one final document, a text message from Grant's phone to an unknown number, sent 3 days before Pike's death. The message was simple, chilling. Problem needs to be handled. Pike is talking. The room went silent. Grant stared at the screen, his face draining of color. Who did you send that message to? Reese asked quietly. Grant didn't answer. Mr. Grant, I'll ask again. Who did you send that message to? Grant's hands clenched on the arms of the chair. I want my attorney. Reese nodded slowly. You're excused, Mr. Grant, but don't leave the jurisdiction. Grant stood and walked out of the room with his shoulders rigid and his eyes fixed straight ahead. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. The grand jury deliberated for 40 minutes. When they returned, the foreperson, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes, stood and read the decision in a voice that didn't waver. On the charge of conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, we find sufficient evidence to indict. On the charge of racketeering, we find sufficient evidence to indict. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find sufficient evidence to indict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find sufficient evidence to indict. Monica exhaled slowly, feeling something loosen in her chest for the first time in weeks. Reese stood. Thank you. The United States will proceed with prosecution. The arrest began that afternoon. Kyle Brennan was taken into custody at his home, a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Shreveport, his wife screaming at the agents while his 2 young sons watched from the doorway. Dennis Walsh was picked up at the state police barracks, led out in handcuffs past a dozen officers who wouldn't meet his eyes. 3 other troopers followed, men whose names had appeared repeatedly in the radio logs and text messages, men who'd coordinated stops and split proceeds and laughed about the people they'd terrorized. Cal Grant was arrested at his office. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stood with his hands behind his back while an agent read him his rights. His brother-in-law, the owner of Sentinel Risk Management, was arrested 2 hours later at the airport, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with a briefcase full of cash and a one-way ticket. By evening, the story had exploded across national news. Cable networks ran footage of the arrests on a loop, interspersed with interviews of victims and legal analysts debating the implications. Social media erupted with hashtags and demands for accountability. And in parishes across Louisiana, people began coming forward. Dozens of new victims, new stories, new evidence of a network that stretched farther than anyone had realized. Monica watched the coverage from her chambers, Chen and Reese standing beside her. The exhaustion was bone deep now, but beneath it was something fiercer, a kind of grim satisfaction that came from seeing justice finally catching up with people who'd believed themselves untouchable. This is just the beginning, Reese said quietly. The trials are going to be brutal. Grant's lawyers will fight every piece of evidence. The police union will claim we're targeting officers unfairly, and there's going to be political pressure to settle quietly and move on. Then we don't settle, Monica said. We take it to trial, we let the evidence speak, and we make sure everyone sees exactly what these men did. Chen nodded. What about you? You've made yourself a target. Grant's network had reach other departments, other states. There are going to be people who want you silenced. Monica turned away from the television, her expression hard. Let them try. But the retaliation came faster and more viciously than even Chen had anticipated. 3 days after the arrests, someone firebombed Elena Park's car in the Tribune parking garage. The explosion shattered windows on 3 floors, and only the building's sprinkler system prevented a larger blaze. Elena escaped with minor burns and smoke inhalation, but her laptop, containing months of investigative notes, was destroyed. Monica visited her in the hospital that evening. Elena sat propped up in bed, her face smudged with soot, her voice hoarse but defiant. "They think they can scare me," she rasped. "They have no idea how stupid that is." "We need to get you protection," Monica said. "I have protection. I have the truth, and I have a platform." Elena coughed, wincing. "Besides, the notes are backed up. Everything's backed up. They destroyed a car and made me really, really angry. That's all they accomplished." Monica managed a thin smile. "You're going to keep writing." "Damn right I am." Elena's eyes were fierce. "And when this goes to trial, I'm going to be in that courtroom every single day. They want to shut me up? They'll have to do a lot better than a car bomb." 2 days later, someone broke into Denise Carter's apartment. They didn't steal anything, just trashed the place and left a note pinned to her daughter's stuffed animal. "Drop the case, or next time we take more than property." Denise called Monica at 2 in the morning, her voice shaking so hard the words were barely coherent. "They were in my home. My kids were sleeping, and they were in my home." "Where are you now?" Monica asked, already pulling on clothes. "At my sister's. But I can't. Judge Hart, I can't do this. I can't put my kids in danger." "You won't have to. We're moving you to a safe location tonight. Federal protection, full security, everything you need." "I don't want to testify anymore." Monica's heart sank. "Denise, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I have to protect my children." The line went dead. Monica sat on the edge of her bed in the darkness, her phone still pressed to her ear, and felt the first real tremor of fear. If Denise withdrew, other witnesses would follow. The case would weaken, and the network, wounded but still dangerous, would regroup and adapt and continue operating in the shadows. She called Chen. "We need to move faster," Monica said when Chen answered. "They're going after witnesses. Denise Carter just backed out." Chen was silent for a moment. "How many others are wavering?" "I don't know, but if they keep escalating, we'll lose them all." "Then we bring in more protection. We expedite the trial schedule, and we make sure these bastards don't have time to destroy what we've built." Chen's voice was tight, controlled. "But Judge Hart, you need to understand something. They're not just going after witnesses. They're going after you." "I know." "No, you don't. I pulled surveillance footage from your neighborhood. 3 different vehicles have been circling your street at odd hours. None of them have plates registered to anyone in the area. Someone is watching you, tracking your movements, looking for an opening." Monica's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want me to do?" "Let us move you to a secure location, just until the trial." "No." "Judge Hart, no." Monica's voice was firm. "I'm not hiding. I'm not running. If they want to come after me, they know where to find me. But I'm not going to let fear dictate how I live." Chen sighed, long and frustrated. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm making sure they know they can't win." Monica stood, walking to her bedroom window and looking out at the quiet street. "They've spent years terrorizing people because they thought no one would fight back. I'm fighting back. And I'm not stopping." The next morning, Monica received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She'd been getting threats and harassment for weeks. But something made her pick up. "Judge Hart?" The voice was male, young, nervous. "Who is this?" "My name is Aaron Mitchell. I was a trooper with LSP. I worked with Brennan and Walsh." Monica's breath caught. "Go on." "I need to talk to you, in person. I have information, things that aren't in the files, things that go higher than Grant." His voice dropped. "But I can't do this over the phone. They're listening. They're always listening." "Where are you?" "Baton Rouge. There's a diner on Government Street near the Capitol. Can you meet me there tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock? Monica hesitated. It could be a trap. It could be someone trying to lure her into the open, make her vulnerable. But it could also be the break they needed. A witness from inside the network, someone who could connect the dots and fill in the gaps. "I'll be there," she said. "Come alone. If you bring feds, I walk." "But, all right." The line went dead. Monica stared at her phone for a long moment, her mind racing. Then she called Chen and told her about the meeting and about her plan to go alone. Chen's response was immediate and emphatic. Absolutely not. No way. That's the worst idea I've heard all week, and I've heard a lot of bad ideas. He said no feds. He's setting you up. Maybe. Or maybe he's a scared cop who's watched his colleagues destroy lives and now wants to make it right. Monica kept her voice calm, reasonable. Either way, I have to go. If there's even a chance he has information we need, I can't pass it up. Then let us surveil from a distance, eyes on the location, back up, ready to move in if things go wrong. Monica considered that. Fine, but stay out of sight. If he sees you, he'll disappear. The diner was a rundown place with faded linoleum floors and booths that had seen better decades. Monica arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat near the window, her back to the wall, her purse within reach. She ordered coffee she didn't drink and waited, her eyes scanning every person who walked through the door. Aaron Mitchell arrived at 9:03. He was younger than Monica had expected, maybe 28, 30 at most, with sandy hair and the kind of haunted expression that came from carrying too much guilt for too long. He slid into the booth across from her without preamble, his hands shaking slightly as he wrapped them around a coffee mug. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "What do you have for me?" Mitchell glanced around the diner, his eyes darting to the door, the windows, the other customers. Then he pulled a folded envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. Monica opened it. Inside were copies of emails, memos, and financial records, documents showing wire transfers from Sentinel Risk Management to accounts in the names of state legislators, district attorneys, and senior officials in the Louisiana Department of Public Safety. "They're paying off politicians," Mitchell said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just cops. Lawmakers who write the asset forfeiture laws, prosecutors who decline to bring charges, department heads who bury investigations. It's not just a few bad troopers. It's a system, and it goes all the way to Baton Rouge." Monica scanned the documents, her pulse quickening. This was bigger than she'd imagined. Not just a highway robbery scheme, but a full-scale corruption network embedded in state government. "Why are you giving me this?" she asked. Mitchell's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Because I can't live with it anymore. I joined the force to help people, and instead I watched good cops get pushed out and bad ones get promoted. I watched them destroy families and laugh about it. And when Pike died, when they killed him and called it suicide, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. They'll come after you." "I know." Mitchell smiled, thin, bitter. "But maybe that's what it takes. Maybe someone has to be willing to lose everything before things change." Monica studied him for a long moment, seeing the fear and resolve warring in his expression. "There's a federal grand jury hearing testimony next week. If you testify, I can guarantee protection." "I'll testify." Mitchell stood, his coffee untouched. "But Judge Hart, be careful. The people behind this, they don't just have badges, they have power, real power, and they're not going to let you take it away without a fight." He walked out of the diner without looking back. Monica sat alone, the envelope heavy in her hands, and realized the case had just transformed into something far more dangerous than a law enforcement corruption scandal. This was about money and politics and the machinery of government itself, all of it built on the suffering of people who'd been deemed disposable. She called Reese from the parking lot. "We need to expand the investigation. It's not just LSP, it's the entire state apparatus." Reese was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How high does it go?" Monica looked down at the documents in her hand, names she recognized, officials she'd worked with, lawmakers who'd smiled at her during judicial conferences and posed for photographs at fundraisers. "High enough that we're going to need more than a grand jury," she said. "We're going to need a racketeering case that can take down everyone involved." "Then we build it." Reese's voice was grim. "But Judge Hart, once we start down this road, there's no going back. We're going to make enemies who have the resources to destroy us." Monica thought about Denise Carter's apartment, trashed and violated. She thought about Elena Park's car exploding in a parking garage. She thought about Evan Pike, lying dead in his apartment, staged like a suicide because he'd tried to do the right thing. "They already tried to destroy us," she said quietly. "Now we make sure they fail." The documents Aaron Mitchell provided sat spread across the conference table in Reese's office, like pieces of a puzzle that kept revealing darker pictures the more they assembled it. Chen stood at the whiteboard, marking connections with red ink, lines connecting state senators to Sentinel Risk Management, district attorneys to offshore accounts, department heads to numbered shell companies. Each new link made the web more intricate and more damning. State Senator Richard Holloway received $200,000 over 18 months, Chen said, tapping a name on the board. He chairs the Judiciary Committee that oversees asset forfeiture reform bills. Every reform proposal in the past 3 years has died in his committee without a vote. Reese leafed through bank statements, his expression growing darker with each page. District Attorney Gloria Chambers got quarterly payments disguised as campaign consulting fees. She's declined to prosecute 78% of cases where LSP seized cash but made no arrests. That's not prosecutorial discretion, that's paid protection. Monica studied a memo dated 6 months earlier, an internal communication from the Department of Public Safety recommending expanded interdiction operations along I-49 and I-20 with revenue projections broken down by quarter and district. The language was bureaucratic and sterile, but the intent was clear. Law enforcement had become a profit center, and the state was actively managing it like a business. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Monica said quietly. They've convinced themselves this is legitimate. Torres entered carrying a laptop and looking like he hadn't slept in days. We just got Mitchell's personnel file. It's been scrubbed, disciplinary actions removed, transfer requests deleted, incident reports missing. But we pulled the backup server, and guess what we found? He set the laptop down and turned it so everyone could see the screen. Mitchell filed 17 internal complaints over 2 years. Allegations of illegal searches, evidence planting, falsified reports. Every single one was routed to Cal Grant and closed within 48 hours. Mitchell wasn't just a witness, Chen said. He was trying to stop it from the inside, and they silenced him. Until now. Monica looked at the faces around the table, exhausted, determined, angry. We use everything Mitchell gave us. We trace every payment, interview every recipient, and we build a RICO case that connects the entire network. Reese leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. You understand what you're asking for? A racketeering case against sitting legislators and senior law enforcement officials? That's going to take months, maybe years. And every single person we name is going to fight with everything they have. Then we make sure the case is airtight. Monica's voice was steel. No shortcuts, no assumptions, no gaps they can exploit. We document every transaction, every communication, every connection, and we do it fast before they have time to destroy evidence or intimidate more witnesses. Patel pulled up a financial analysis on her tablet. We've already identified $32 million moving through the network over 5 years. Most of it flows through Sentinel, but there are smaller tributaries, consulting firms, legal retainers, real estate transactions that don't make economic sense. If we can trace the money all the way back to the source and forward to the recipients, we have them. What about Mitchell? Chen asked. If he's testifying, we need him in protective custody immediately. He refused, Torres said. Said if he disappears, his family becomes a target. He wants to stay visible, keep working, act like nothing's changed. Monica shook her head. That's suicide. That's conviction. Torres met her eyes. He knows what he's risking. He's willing to do it anyway. They worked through the night, building organizational charts and financial timelines, identifying weak points in the network where pressure might crack someone into cooperation. By dawn, they had a preliminary target list: 12 state officials, 14 law enforcement personnel, 6 private contractors, and 2 judges who'd consistently ruled in favor of the state in forfeiture cases despite overwhelming evidence of misconduct. 2 judges. Monica stared at those names and felt something cold settle in her stomach. People she'd sat beside at conferences, colleagues she'd considered friends. The corruption hadn't just infected law enforcement, it had metastasized into the judiciary itself. Reese noticed her expression. You know them. I've worked with them for years. Monica's voice was hollow. I thought they were principled. Tough on crime, maybe, but fair. They're on the payroll, Chen said bluntly. Judge Harlan received $150,000 in speaking fees from Sentinel. Judge Voss got a beach house in Florida purchased through a shell company that traces back to Grant's brother-in-law. They weren't being fair. They were being paid. Monica closed her eyes, breathing slowly through the wave of betrayal. She'd believed in the system, believed that for all its flaws, the institutions that upheld justice were fundamentally sound. But the evidence spread across this table told a different story. The system wasn't broken. It had been captured, turned into a machine that extracted wealth from the vulnerable and distributed it to the powerful. "We bring charges against all of them," she said finally. "I don't care if they're judges or senators or department heads. They took money. If they protected this operation, they face consequences." The next week was a blur of subpoenas and interviews and emergency court filings. Reese convened a second grand jury to hear evidence of the broader conspiracy. Chen's team executed search warrants on homes and offices, seizing computers and files and financial records. Patel worked with forensic accountants to trace money through layers of corporate shells and overseas transfers. And Monica found herself at the center of a storm that was growing more violent by the day. The backlash came from every direction. The Louisiana State Police Benevolent Association filed a federal lawsuit claiming the investigation violated officers' due process rights. The state attorney general, who'd initially supported the inquiry, suddenly announced he was reviewing the scope and appropriateness of federal intervention in state law enforcement matters. Editorial boards across Louisiana published pieces questioning whether Monica's personal experience had clouded her judgment and made her vindictive rather than objective. The most vicious attacks came from politicians whose names appeared in Mitchell's documents. Senator Holloway held a press conference on the Capitol steps, his face red with indignation, his voice booming across microphones. "Judge Hart has embarked on a political witch hunt designed to undermine law enforcement and advance her own agenda," he declared. "She's using the power of the federal government to settle personal scores and destroy the careers of dedicated public servants. This isn't justice, it's tyranny." Monica watched the press conference from her chambers, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Chen stood beside her, arms crossed, face impassive. "He's scared," Chen said. "People don't fight this hard unless they're terrified." "He should be." Monica turned away from the screen. "How many more witnesses do we need?" "For Holloway? 3 more transactions and we have him cold. He's been sloppy, using his personal account for some transfers, sending emails from his official address about revenue optimization strategies. He thought no one would ever look." "What about the district attorney?" "Chambers is trickier. She's been careful, layers everything through campaign accounts and PACs. But we have her assistant, woman named Rachel Suarez, who's willing to testify about instructions to drop cases. Suarez has contemporaneous notes, emails, the whole package." Monica nodded. "Bring her in. Protect her like we're protecting Mitchell." But protecting witnesses was becoming harder as the network fought back with increasing desperation. Rachel Suarez's apartment was burglarized 3 days after she agreed to testify. Her laptop stolen, her files ransacked, threatening messages spray-painted on her bedroom wall. Erin Mitchell's wife was followed home from work by an unmarked car that circled her block 5 times before speeding away. And someone leaked Elena Park's home address on social media, along with false accusations that she was fabricating evidence for personal profit. The attacks weren't random. They were coordinated, strategic, designed to isolate and terrify anyone who might speak against the network. Chen increased security details, moved witnesses to safe houses, and implemented counter-surveillance protocols. But the message was clear: cooperate and suffer. Monica received her own warning on a Thursday evening. She'd stayed late at the courthouse reviewing depositions and walked to her car alone despite Chen's repeated insistence that she wait for escort. The parking garage was quiet, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the air thick with exhaust and concrete dust. She was halfway to her vehicle when she saw it, a manila envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. No markings, no postage, just a plain envelope that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Monica looked around the garage, empty, silent. She pulled latex gloves from her purse, a habit she'd developed over the past weeks, and carefully removed the envelope. Inside were photographs. Monica in her chambers. Monica leaving the courthouse. Monica at her kitchen window. Monica sleeping in her bed. The message was obvious. We can reach you anywhere, anytime, and you'll never see us coming. Monica's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and called Chen. "Someone's been in my house." Chen arrived with a tactical team 20 minutes later. They swept Monica's home room by room, finding 3 cameras hidden in smoke detectors and air vents, a GPS tracker under her car, and a listening device inside her home office telephone. The violations felt physical, an invasion that left Monica feeling exposed and vulnerable in ways she'd never experienced before. "How long have they been watching?" Monica asked, her voice tight. Chen examined one of the cameras, her expression grim. "At least 2 weeks, maybe longer. These are professional-grade equipment installed by someone who knew what they were doing." "Can you trace them?" "We'll try, but I doubt we'll find anything. These people are careful." Chen met Monica's eyes. "Judge Hart, you need to understand this isn't intimidation anymore. This is a direct threat. They're showing you they have access, they have capability, and they're willing to use it." Monica sank onto her couch, the weight of the past weeks finally crushing down on her. She'd been strong, defiant, determined not to back down. But sitting in her violated home, knowing strangers had watched her sleep, photographed her most private moments, she felt something close to fear trying to claw its way up her throat. "What do you recommend?" she asked quietly. "Full protective detail, 24-hour surveillance, and seriously consider relocating to a secure facility until this is over." Monica looked around her living room, the house she'd bought 15 years ago, the space where she'd built a life, the walls covered with photographs of family and friends and memories. Leaving felt like surrender. Staying felt like defiance. And she was so tired of having to choose between safety and principle. "Give me the full detail," she said finally. "But I'm not leaving my home. I'm not giving them that victory." Chen didn't argue. She just nodded and started making calls. The trial began 6 weeks later in a federal courtroom packed with reporters, activists, victims, and officers who'd come to watch their colleagues face judgment. Kyle Brennan sat at the defense table in a gray suit that made him look smaller than Monica remembered, his face carefully neutral, but his hands restless on the table. Beside him sat Dennis Walsh, Cal Grant, and 4 other officers, all facing multiple counts of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and racketeering. Separate proceedings had been initiated against the state officials, but this trial was the foundation, prove the core conspiracy, establish the pattern, show the jury exactly what these men had done. Everything else would follow. Reese delivered the opening statement with the calm precision of a surgeon. He walked the jury through the timeline, stops, seizures, planted evidence, coordinated operations, and a money trail that led from highway shoulders to private bank accounts. He showed them Evan Pike's text messages, Marcus Wade's accident report, the photographs of victims' cars being searched without consent, and he played Monica's recording, Brennan's voice filling the courtroom, aggressive and dismissive and damning. "These men wore badges," Reese said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "They took an oath to protect and serve, and they used that oath as cover to rob innocent people and destroy lives. The evidence will show you exactly how they did it, how long they did it, and how they conspired to hide it. And when you've heard all of that evidence, I'm going to ask you to hold them accountable." The defense attorneys fought hard. They portrayed their clients as dedicated officers operating in difficult circumstances, making judgment calls under pressure, following procedures that had been approved by supervisors and sanctioned by policy. They attacked the victim's credibility, questioned the timing of complaints, suggested that Monica's personal experience had tainted the investigation. They painted the federal government as overreaching, criminalizing normal law enforcement activity because one judge felt disrespected. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witness after witness took the stand and described identical experiences, pretextual stops, coerced searches, cash seized, and never returned. The college student cried as she described begging Walsh to leave her enough money for gas. The veteran's voice shook with rage as he recounted Brennan mocking his disability. Denise Carter, who'd initially withdrawn but ultimately agreed to testify under heavy protection, spoke about her children asking why the police officer had taken their grocery money. Aaron Mitchell testified for 3 days. He walked the jury through the internal culture of the interdiction program, explaining how officers competed for seizure numbers, how supervisors praised aggressive tactics, how Grant made complaints disappear. He produced emails showing coordination between troopers, radio logs demonstrating planned operations, and his own documentation of stops he'd witnessed and reported. The defense attorneys savaged him on cross-examination. They called him a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, questioned why he'd waited so long to come forward, suggested he was fabricating evidence to secure immunity for his own misconduct. Mitchell took every attack without flinching, his voice steady, his answers consistent. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said during one particularly harsh exchange. "I should have refused to participate, should have resigned, should have done something, and I'm going to live with that failure for the rest of my life. But that doesn't change what I saw. It doesn't change what these men did." Chen testified about the financial investigation, tracing money from seizures through Sentinel risk management to personal accounts in shell companies. She showed the jury spreadsheets demonstrating how reported seizures didn't match bank deposits, how cash disappeared in the gaps, how the system was designed to be opaque. Patel backed her up with forensic analysis, digital signatures proving documents had been altered, metadata showing files had been deleted and recovered, timestamps demonstrating coordination between events official reports claimed were unrelated. Monica testified on the 8th day. She described her traffic stop in detail: Brennan's aggression, the illegal search, the planted bottle, Grant's arrival, and veiled threats. She spoke calmly, precisely, without embellishment or emotion, letting the facts carry the weight. The defense tried to suggest she'd misinterpreted a routine stop because of her background and biases, but Monica's credibility was unshakable. She was a federal judge with 15 years on the bench, describing events captured on audio recording. There was no ambiguity. The trial lasted 7 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the foreperson read the verdicts in a voice that didn't waver. Guilty on all counts for Brennan, Walsh, and Grant. Guilty on most counts for the other 4 officers. The courtroom erupted, victims crying, officers staring in disbelief, reporters rushing for the exits to file their stories. Monica sat in the gallery and felt something release in her chest. Not relief exactly, but a sense that the machinery of justice had finally, painfully, functioned the way it was supposed to. But the victory was incomplete. The state officials were still fighting their cases, filing motions to dismiss, claiming immunity, arguing that their actions fell within the scope of legitimate policymaking. Senator Holloway's attorney argued that campaign contributions weren't bribes unless there was explicit quid pro quo. Judge Harlan claimed his speaking fees were legitimate compensation for expertise. District Attorney Chambers maintained she'd exercised prosecutorial discretion in good faith. Reese filed a superseding indictment 2 weeks after the first trial concluded, adding charges and defendants based on evidence that had emerged during testimony. The second trial was scheduled for 4 months later, and in the meantime, the network continued to fracture. Dennis Walsh agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided detailed testimony about coordination with other officers, described how Grant had orchestrated cover-ups, and implicated supervisors who'd known about the operation and encouraged it. His cooperation opened new investigative threads, connections to departments in Arkansas and Texas, evidence of similar operations on other highway corridors, indications that the model had been replicated across multiple states. The scope of the conspiracy kept expanding, each revelation more disturbing than the last. This wasn't just Louisiana. It was a regional network of law enforcement agencies using traffic stops to generate revenue, protected by officials who benefited from the proceeds. The federal government launched parallel investigations in 3 other states. Congressional committees announced hearings, and victims who'd stayed silent for years began coming forward, emboldened by the convictions. Monica watched the dominoes fall and felt the weight of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't a few bad officers. It was systemic corruption embedded so deeply in law enforcement culture that it had become normalized, accepted, defended, and dismantling it was going to take years of prosecutions, reforms, and constant vigilance. But there were cracks in the foundation now. Visible, undeniable cracks that couldn't be plastered over or ignored. 3 months after the first trial, Monica sat in her chambers reviewing briefs when her clerk knocked and entered with an uncertain expression. "Judge Hart? There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent." "Who is it?" "Gloria Chambers." Monica's hand tightened on her pen. The district attorney who'd declined to prosecute dozens of cases, who'd received quarterly payments from Sentinel, who was currently fighting federal charges. The woman who'd used her office to protect criminals because they paid her. Send her in, Monica said. Chambers entered slowly, looking diminished in a way that went beyond her rumpled suit and tired eyes. She'd lost weight, Monica noticed, her face gaunt, her shoulders hunched. She sat without being invited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thank you for seeing me, Chambers said quietly. You have 5 minutes. Chambers nodded, accepting the limitation. I want to cooperate. I'll testify against Holloway, against the others, provide documents and communications, whatever you need. In exchange, I want immunity from prosecution. Monica studied her carefully, looking for deception or calculation. All she saw was exhaustion and defeat. Why now? Because I'm tired. Chambers' voice cracked slightly. I'm tired of lying, tired of pretending I didn't know what was happening, tired of watching my career and reputation disintegrate while I try to defend the indefensible. I made terrible choices, Judge Hart. I let money corrupt my judgment, and I looked the other way while people suffered. I can't undo that. But maybe I can help make sure everyone responsible faces consequences. You destroyed lives, Monica said, her voice hard. You had the power to stop this operation years ago, and instead you protected it. You took money to let criminals operate with impunity. Why should I believe you want to do the right thing now? Chambers met her eyes, and for the first time Monica saw something genuine there. Shame, regret, and a desperate need for absolution that no deal could provide. Because I can't live with what I've done. Because my daughter asked me last night if the news stories about me were true, and I couldn't lie to her anymore. And because if I'm going down, and I am, I understand that. I'd rather go down telling the truth than protecting people who never cared about me in the first place. Monica sat back, weighing the offer. Chambers had access to communications and meetings that no one else could provide. Her testimony could connect Holloway directly to the conspiracy, could implicate other state officials, could crack open the political machinery that had enabled the operation. But giving her immunity meant letting someone who'd perpetuated injustice walk away from significant consequences. I'll take your offer to the U.S. attorney, Monica said finally, but I'm not making any promises. Your cooperation has to be complete, verifiable, and lead to successful prosecutions. And even then, you're going to carry what you've done for the rest of your life. No deal changes that. Chambers nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I know. She stood and left without another word, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. Monica sat alone in her chambers for a long time after Chambers left, staring at the law books lining her walls and thinking about justice. The clean, simple version she'd believed in at the start of her career, right and wrong clearly delineated, consequences proportionate to actions, truth prevailing in the end. And the messy, complicated reality she'd learned over 15 years on the bench, compromises and calculations, imperfect outcomes, victories that felt hollow because they required dealing with people who'd caused the harm in the first place. Chambers would likely get her deal. Her testimony would help convict others. And somewhere, victims would have to live with the knowledge that one of the architects of their suffering faced minimal consequences because she'd been useful. It wasn't fair, but it was the system, and Monica had learned that sometimes you worked within the system's constraints because the alternative was letting everyone escape accountability. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chen. Holloway's lawyers just filed a motion to dismiss, arguing legislative immunity and First Amendment protection for campaign contributions. Monica typed back, schedule a hearing. We'll argue it in open court and put his conduct on the record. The fight wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase where the battles would be fought in legal briefs and appellate courts and political arenas, where the wins would be measured in inches rather than miles, and every step forward required exhausting effort. But Monica had come too far to stop now. Too many people had risked everything to bring this network down. Too many voices had been silenced for too long. And somewhere on Interstate 49, drivers were still being pulled over, still being searched, still being victimized by systems that treated them as prey rather than citizens. The work continued. The fight continued. And Monica Hart, federal judge, traffic stop survivor, and now the public face of a nationwide reckoning with law enforcement corruption, was determined to see it through to the end, whatever that end might look like. The hearing on Holloway's motion to dismiss took place on a gray morning when winter rain hammered against the courthouse windows. The gallery was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, activists holding signs, victims who'd traveled hundreds of miles to watch, and a cluster of state legislators who'd come to support their colleague. Monica sat at the bench, her robe heavy on her shoulders, and watched the senator's legal team arrange their materials with the confidence of people who'd rarely lost. Holloway's lead attorney was a man named Vincent Cross, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who specialized in making powerful people's problems disappear. He approached the podium with easy assurance and launched into his argument without preamble. Your Honor, Senator Holloway's conduct falls squarely within the scope of legislative immunity. He was performing his duties as chair of the Judiciary Committee, evaluating policy proposals and making decisions about which bills to advance. The fact that he received campaign contributions during this period, contributions that are legal, disclosed, and protected by the First Amendment, does not transform legitimate legislative activity into criminal conspiracy. Monica listened without expression. Cross continued for 20 minutes, citing precedent and constitutional principles, arguing that prosecuting legislators for their official actions would chill democratic governance and weaponize the criminal justice system. He was good, smooth, persuasive, wrapping corruption in the language of civic duty. When he finished, Reese stood. He was quieter than Cross, less theatrical, but his words carried the weight of documented truth. Your Honor, Senator Holloway didn't just receive campaign contributions. He received $200,000 in structured payments from an entity that was actively profiting from illegal activity. And in exchange for those payments, he killed every reform bill that would have restricted asset forfeiture practices. That's not legislative immunity. That's a bribe. Reese pulled up emails on the courtroom screen, communications between Holloway and Grant discussing specific bills, timing payments to coincide with committee votes, coordinating messaging to defend the interdiction program. One email from Holloway to Grant was particularly damning. Keep the revenue flowing, and I'll make sure the reforms stay buried. We both benefit. The gallery stirred. Monica saw Holloway's face go tight, his jaw clenched. Legislative immunity protects lawmakers from prosecution for speeches and votes, Reese continued. It does not protect them from accepting bribes to corrupt the legislative process. Senator Holloway sold his office. He used his position to protect a criminal enterprise that destroyed lives and generated millions in illegal proceeds. That is not democracy, Your Honor. That is racketeering. Monica took her time considering the arguments, reviewing the case law both sides had cited, weighing the constitutional implications against the factual record. Finally, she spoke. Legislative immunity is a critical protection that prevents the criminalization of political disagreement, but it is not absolute, and it does not extend to conduct that is criminal in nature. The evidence before this court shows a pattern of payments linked directly to specific legislative actions designed to protect an illegal operation. That goes beyond policy disagreement into the realm of corrupt exchange. Motion to dismiss is denied. This case will proceed to trial. Cross objected immediately, his voice rising. Your Honor, with respect, this ruling sets a dangerous precedent. Your objection is noted, Mr. Cross. But the precedent that concerns me is allowing elected officials to profit from criminal enterprises while claiming immunity. If Senator Holloway believes he acted lawfully, he'll have the opportunity to present that defense to a jury. Monica's voice was firm, final. We're adjourned. She stood and left the bench before Cross could respond, the gavel's echo still hanging in the air. The ruling made headlines within the hour. Legal scholars debated its implications. Civil liberties organizations issued statements supporting the decision. And in Baton Rouge, the remaining officials implicated in the scandal began calculating their options with increasing desperation. 2 days later, Judge Harlan resigned from the bench and entered a guilty plea in exchange for a 5-year sentence. He stood in federal court looking 20 years older than his 62 years, his voice barely audible as he admitted accepting payments to rule favorably in forfeiture cases. I told myself I was just being pragmatic, he said during his allocution, his hands trembling on the podium, that the money wasn't influencing my decisions, that I was ruling on the law. But I was lying to myself. I knew what I was doing. I knew those officers were violating people's rights, and I provided legal cover because I was getting paid. I'm sorry. It's inadequate, but I'm sorry. Monica watched from the gallery and felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness that someone who'd sworn to uphold justice had sold it for a beach house and speaking fees. The trials continued through spring. Senator Holloway fought until the end, maintaining his innocence even as the evidence mounted. But Gloria Chambers' testimony was devastating. She described meetings where Holloway explicitly promised to kill reform bills in exchange for continued payments, produced emails showing him coordinating with Grant to suppress investigations, and provided bank records documenting the money flow. The jury convicted him on all counts after 6 hours of deliberation. 3 other state legislators pleaded guilty before trial. 2 senior officials in the Department of Public Safety were convicted after a 3-week trial that exposed how they'd created policy frameworks specifically designed to maximize seizure revenue. And in Arkansas and Texas, parallel investigations led to indictments of officers who'd replicated the Louisiana model. By summer, the legal machinery had processed dozens of defendants, secured convictions or guilty pleas from most, and generated enough evidence to fundamentally reshape how asset forfeiture was understood and regulated. But for Monica, the real measure of success wasn't the conviction rate, it was what happened to the victims. A federal claims process was established to return seized assets. Denise Carter got her $4,200 back, plus interest and compensation for the legal fees she'd spent trying to recover it. The college student received her apartment deposit money and an additional settlement for the trauma of being detained and searched. The veteran got his disability payment returned along with a formal apology from the Department of Justice. In total, more than $18 million was returned to victims over 18 months. It wasn't everything that had been stolen. Some money had been spent. Some records had been destroyed. Some victims couldn't be located. But it was accountability of a kind that had seemed impossible when Monica first stood on that highway shoulder with Brennan's hand twisting her wrist. The reforms came more slowly. Louisiana passed comprehensive asset forfeiture legislation requiring criminal convictions before property could be permanently seized, mandating independent oversight of interdiction programs, and creating transparency requirements for revenue generated from traffic stops. Other states followed with similar bills, often citing the Louisiana scandal as justification. The Department of Justice issued new guidelines for federal law enforcement agencies prohibiting participation in state interdiction programs that lacked adequate safeguards. Training curricula were revised to emphasize constitutional protections, and body camera requirements became standard across agencies that had previously resisted them. None of it was perfect. Loopholes remained, enforcement was inconsistent, and the cultural attitudes that had enabled the abuse persisted in pockets of law enforcement. But the foundation had shifted. The assumption that officers could operate without scrutiny, that victims' voices didn't matter, that the system would protect its own, all of that had been shaken. Monica returned to her regular docket as the trials wound down, hearing cases and writing opinions and trying to reclaim something of the routine that had defined her career before that afternoon on Interstate 49. But she was changed in ways both subtle and profound. She questioned witness testimony more carefully, scrutinized police reports with greater skepticism, and paid closer attention to patterns that might indicate systemic problems rather than isolated incidents. And she heard from people. Letters arrived at her chambers from across the country, drivers who'd been stopped and searched, people who'd lost property to civil forfeiture, families who'd watched loved ones crushed by systems that claimed to serve justice. Some wanted advice, some just wanted to be heard, and some wrote simply to say thank you for proving that fighting back was possible. One letter came from a woman in Oregon who'd been stopped on a rural highway and had her life savings seized while traveling to visit her dying mother. She'd given up trying to recover the money after months of bureaucratic runaround, but Monica's case had inspired her to file a federal lawsuit. She'd won, gotten her money back, and the officer who'd seized it had been fired. "I thought I was alone," the woman wrote. "I thought no one would believe me. But you showed me that the truth matters, even when it's hard. Thank you for being brave enough to fight." Monica kept that letter on her desk, a reminder of why the exhaustion and threats and sleepless nights had been worth it. 18 months after her traffic stop, Monica drove to Lily's law school graduation. She took Interstate 49, the same route she'd traveled that afternoon, past the mile markers and rest stops and stretches of highway that had become embedded in her memory. The drive was uneventful. No patrol cars appeared in her rear-view mirror. No lights forced her onto the shoulder, but halfway through the journey, she passed a Louisiana State Police cruiser parked at a rest area. The trooper was young, unfamiliar, standing beside his vehicle with a body camera visible on his chest. He glanced at Monica's car as she passed, but made no move to follow. Just another driver on the highway, no threat, no target, no revenue opportunity. Monica felt something loosen in her chest. The road was different now. Not perfect, not safe from all abuse, but different, changed by evidence and testimony, and people who'd refused to stay silent. She made it to the ceremony on time. Lily walked across the stage in her cap and gown, beaming as the dean announced her name and academic honors. Monica stood with the other families, clapping until her hands hurt, feeling pride so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they went to dinner. Monica, Lily, and Monica's sister Sarah, who'd driven in from Houston. They sat at a corner table in a restaurant with soft lighting and good food, and for the first time in months, Monica allowed herself to relax completely. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said, raising her glass toward Monica. "You could have let it go. You should have let it go, probably, but you didn't, and look what happened." Monica shook her head. "It wasn't just me. It was Chen and Reese and Mitchell and all the people who testified even when they were terrified. I was just the one with a platform and resources. They're the ones who showed real courage." "You're the one who started it," Lily said quietly. "You're the reason I'm not afraid to drive anymore. You're the reason other people aren't afraid. That matters, Aunt Monica. That matters so much." Monica reached across the table and squeezed her niece's hand, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. They stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking and laughing, and celebrating not just Lily's achievement, but the simple fact of being together, safe, free from the fear that had shadowed them for so long. Monica drove home alone that night, taking surface streets instead of the interstate, and thought about all the drivers who were traveling highways across the country at that moment. People who would never know they were safer because of evidence gathered and testimony given and a network of corruption dismantled piece by piece. The work wasn't finished. It would never be truly finished, but it was better. Measurably, documentably better. 6 months later, Monica sat in her chambers reviewing a suppression motion when Chen called, with news that made her set down her pen and close her eyes in relief. "We got him," Chen said. "The man who killed Pike." His name was Robert Vance, a former LSP officer who'd been fired 3 years earlier for excessive force, but had maintained connections with Brennan and Grant. Phone records placed him near Pike's apartment the night of the murder. Forensic evidence tied him to the scene. And Dennis Walsh, still cooperating from prison, testified that he'd overheard Grant and Vance discussing handling the Pike problem 2 days before Pike's death. Vance was arrested in Mississippi, where he'd been working as a private security contractor. He denied everything during interrogation, but the evidence was overwhelming. He went to trial 4 months later and was convicted of first-degree murder. The jury recommended life without parole. "Pike's family can finally have some closure," Chen said. "It's not enough, but it's something." "It's justice," Monica said quietly. "Imperfect and late, but justice." That evening, Monica attended a memorial service for Evan Pike at a small church outside Baton Rouge. His parents were there, along with his girlfriend and a handful of former colleagues who'd remained loyal. Aaron Mitchell gave a brief eulogy, his voice breaking as he described Pike as someone who'd tried to do the right thing in a system that punished integrity. Evan believed that wearing a badge meant something, Mitchell said, that it came with responsibilities, not just authority. And when he saw those responsibilities being betrayed, he couldn't stay silent. It cost him everything. But because of what he did, because of the evidence he preserved, dozens of people faced justice. He didn't die for nothing, and I'm going to make sure his name is remembered. Monica approached Pike's parents after the service. They were older than she'd expected, worn down by grief and legal battles, and the weight of watching their son be murdered and defamed. "I'm so sorry," Monica said, the words feeling inadequate. "Evan was braver than most people will ever know. He's the reason we were able to build the case, the reason so many officers are in prison now. I wish I could have protected him." Pike's mother took Monica's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You're the reason his death meant something. You're the reason people know the truth. Thank you for that." They stood together in the parking lot as other mourners filed past, united by loss and by the hard-won knowledge that sometimes justice required sacrifices that no one should have to make. 2 years after Monica's traffic stop, she was invited to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. The event was held in Washington, attended by legislators, law enforcement officials, advocacy groups, and academics who'd spent careers studying and fighting systemic injustice. Monica spoke for 30 minutes about her experience: the stop, the investigation, the trials, the reforms. She emphasized the importance of documentation, the power of witness testimony, and the necessity of holding institutions accountable when they fail to police themselves. But mostly, she talked about the ordinary people who'd found extraordinary courage when the system threatened to crush them. Denise Carter could have stayed silent, Monica said, standing at the podium and looking out at hundreds of faces. She could have decided her children's safety was more important than justice, and no one would have blamed her. But she testified anyway, and her courage inspired others to do the same. That's how change happens, not through grand gestures, but through individuals deciding that truth matters more than fear. The speech received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people approached Monica with their own stories of traffic stops, seizures, and retaliation. Some wanted advice, some needed connection, and some just wanted to share their experiences with someone who understood. One woman, mid-40s, professional attire, confident bearing, waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. "Judge Hart, my name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a state senator in New Mexico, and I'm drafting asset forfeiture reform legislation based on Louisiana's law. I'd like your input if you're willing." Monica smiled. "I'm willing." They talked for an hour about specific provisions, enforcement mechanisms, and political strategies for overcoming law enforcement opposition. When they finished, Torres handed Monica her card. "This is spreading," Torres said. "What you started in Louisiana, it's becoming a movement. States are passing reforms, police departments are changing policies, and people who've been victimized for years are finally speaking up. You did that." Monica shook her head. "The victims did that. I just had the platform to amplify their voices." "Oh, then keep amplifying," Torres said, "because there are still a lot of voices that need to be heard." Monica returned to Shreveport and resumed her work, hearing cases and writing opinions, and occasionally speaking at conferences about the intersection of civil rights and law enforcement. But she also started something new, a pro bono legal clinic that helped people navigate asset forfeiture recovery processes, filing motions and appealing denials, and fighting bureaucratic obstacles that were designed to discourage claims. Lily joined the clinic after graduating law school, working alongside Monica to represent clients who couldn't afford private attorneys. Together, they recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars for victims across Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. Each case was a small victory, a crack in the foundation of a system that had operated unchecked for too long. 3 years after her traffic stop, Monica received word that Kyle Brennan had filed an appeal claiming his conviction was tainted by prosecutorial misconduct. The claim was baseless, a desperate attempt to overturn overwhelming evidence, but it required a response. Monica spent a weekend reviewing trial transcripts and briefing materials, preparing for the possibility that she'd have to testify again. The appeal was denied. The Fifth Circuit issued a blistering opinion rejecting every argument Brennan's attorneys had raised, noting that the evidence of systematic civil rights violations was so extensive and well-documented that no rational jury could have reached a different verdict. Brennan would serve 23 years in federal prison. Walsh got 18. Grant got 26, including consecutive sentences for his role in Pike's murder conspiracy. The other officers received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. And Holloway, the senator who'd protected the operation for profit, got 12 years along with permanent disbarment from holding public office. The sentences felt both too harsh and not harsh enough. Too harsh because prison was brutal and these men would suffer. Not harsh enough because no amount of incarceration could undo the trauma they'd inflicted or restore the years they'd stolen from victims. But it was accountability, real, measurable, documented accountability in a system that too often provided none. 5 years after her traffic stop, Monica drove Interstate 49 again. This time, she was accompanied by Elena Park, who was finishing a documentary about the case and wanted footage of the location where everything had started. They parked at mile marker 72, and Elena set up her camera while Monica stood on the shoulder where Brennan had forced her off the road. The highway looked the same trees, same red clay, same endless asphalt stretching toward the horizon. But it felt different, lighter somehow, freer. "How does it feel to be back here?" Elena asked, the camera recording. Monica considered the question carefully. "Like closing a circle. This is where I learned that the system I'd spent my career serving was broken in ways I hadn't wanted to see. And it's where I decided that broken doesn't mean unfixable." "Do you think it's fixed now?" "No." Monica's answer was immediate, honest. "But it's better. Officers wear body cameras, seizure reports are audited, victims have mechanisms to recover property, and people know they can fight back. That's not perfect, but it's progress." Elena lowered the camera. "You know you changed a lot of lives, right? Not just the victims who got their money back, but the people who saw what you did and found courage to stand up in their own situations. You created ripples that are still spreading." Monica looked down the highway, watching cars pass, each one carrying someone with their own story, their own struggles, their own quiet battles against systems that seemed too powerful to challenge. "I hope so," she said quietly, "because there are still too many people out there who think they're powerless, who think their voices don't matter. And they need to know that's not true. The system is made of people, and people can change it." They filmed for another hour, capturing Monica's testimony about what had happened and what had changed since. When they finished, Elena packed up her equipment and they drove back to Shreveport together, talking about the documentary's release date and the impact they hoped it would have. The documentary premiered 6 months later at film festivals across the country. It won awards, generated discussions, and inspired new investigations into law enforcement corruption in other jurisdictions. And it ensured that Evan Pike's name, Denise Carter's courage, and Aaron Mitchell's integrity would be remembered long after the legal proceedings had faded from headlines. 7 years after her traffic stop, Monica stood in her chambers on her final day as a federal judge. She was 63 years old, ready to retire, and planning to spend more time with Lily's children, 2 beautiful grandnieces who called her auntie and didn't yet understand what she'd done but would learn the story as they grew older. Her colleagues had thrown a retirement party, complete with speeches and gifts and genuine affection from people she'd worked beside for 2 decades. But the moment that mattered most came at the end, when a young woman approached nervously and introduced herself as a first-year law student. "I read about your case in my civil rights class," the woman said, her voice soft but determined. "And it's why I decided to become a lawyer. I want to fight for people the way you did. I want to make sure systems work for everyone, not just people with power." Monica felt tears prick her eyes. "Then do it. Fight hard, tell the truth, and never forget that the people you're serving are real, with real lives and real suffering. That's what matters." The young woman nodded, shook Monica's hand, and walked away with her shoulders squared and her chin up, ready to take on battles Monica wouldn't be there to fight, but knew would continue long after she was gone. That evening, Monica drove home for the last time as a sitting judge. She took Interstate 49, staying exactly at the speed limit, both hands on the wheel. Halfway home, she passed a state police cruiser conducting a traffic stop. The trooper was speaking calmly to the driver, his body camera visible, no aggression in his posture. The driver looked nervous but not terrified. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. Monica continued home, past the mile markers and rest stops and landscapes that had become part of her story. She thought about all the miles she'd traveled, literal and metaphorical, since that afternoon when Brennan had forced her onto the shoulder and changed the trajectory of her life. She thought about the victims who'd found their voices, the officers who'd faced consequences, the reforms that had been written into law. She thought about Evan Pike, who'd died trying to do the right thing, and Aaron Mitchell, who'd lived to see justice served. She thought about Elena Park's burned car, and Denise Carter's tears, and Lily's fear, all transformed into something stronger and more enduring than the trauma that had caused them. And she thought about the future, the young lawyers and activists and ordinary citizens who would continue the work, who would challenge injustice and demand accountability and refuse to accept systems that treated people as disposable. The road stretched ahead, and Monica drove forward into whatever came next, carrying the knowledge that she'd made a difference in ways both large and small, that the system was better because she'd refused to stay silent, that justice, imperfect and incomplete as it was, had prevailed. It was enough. Not everything she'd hoped for, but enough. Monica pulled into her driveway as the sun set over Shreveport, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She sat in her car for a moment, hands still on the wheel, feeling the weight of the past 7 years finally lift. Then she got out, locked the door, and walked into her house, leaving the highway behind but carrying its lessons forward into every day that followed. The story didn't end with a grand celebration or a dramatic final confrontation. It ended with an ordinary evening in an ordinary life, made extraordinary by the knowledge that truth had been told, justice had been served, and the road ahead was a little bit safer for everyone who traveled it. That was the victory. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And it was enough.